Hey everybody, it's Bust, welcoming you to 2024, hoping you had a wonderful 2023 and the new year begins off nicely for you. And so with the beginning of the new year, I wanted to go in and do a big old review over the year of 2023 for our space in the Legends of Runeterra. I wanted to make a video for the champions, a video for the mechanics, and then a video for the competitive season, all from the take of your friend here, FTP Bust. And so in this video, we're going to be going over the champions. I'm going to talk about each of them individually for just a moment, some of the hits and the misses and the things that they brought along into the competitive scene of Legends of Runeterra. And so first and foremost, we start things in glory in Navori, the first set of the year, also bringing in Sett. The Sett brings in Sett. Well done there. And so that ushered in the spending mana mechanic, and for Sett, most importantly, the coin mechanic. And so we don't have coins on the screen, but the coin mechanic and Sett working together to making this be the most popular control deck of the format throughout the entirety of the year, and the deck that is looking to still go strong into the future. If you're not familiar with the combo, the coin lets you generate mana for every stack of the coin that's in your hand, and then if you have a flipped Karma or a flipped Seraphine on the board, the coin doubles. And so if you have a 5 mana worth of coin in hand, you get to play it with the flipped Karma on board, generate 10 mana, then say play the card draw spell, get 2 more coins in hand, which amounts to 4 mana, and get to combo and combo and combo. And so as far as Sett himself goes, I think this was a fine champion. He survived the entirety of the year without being nerfed or buffed while also remaining relevant. So I assume that that is enough to say that Sett has been quite the success. I personally don't play this card. It's in Ionia. If you follow our channel, Ionia is just not something I have any desire to do whatsoever. But having faced down Sett multiple times, I feel like he's been fine. You know, I like the interactive mechanics that he brings. The challenger stuff is neat. Getting barriers gives him tie-ins to units like Shen and Jarvan. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with Sett, and I feel like he was just a pretty big win across the board. As much as people like to trash on Ionia and how it's not a real faction and everything is just garbage, I think that Sett really says, hey, you know, there is some powerful stuff out here up and running around, and this is what, to me, a good interactive champion looks like. And so this is all I could think of, though, as I wanted to talk about Sett, and all you really see is Karma Sett, just the classic line from one of my favorite movies, Step Brothers, and did we just become best friends? Yep. Good stuff right there. And so speaking of winners, Jack was not. He did catch a bit of a buff throughout the season, but it was not enough to ever turn him into relevance. And that was always a bit of a bummer to me. Jack has what strikes me as being all the necessities of being a good card. A 4/5 stat line for 4 mana is not that bad. Has a relevant keyword for combats and brash. He has a strike ability which generates a card. And as we've seen throughout the course of the game, it doesn't matter what card you're generating. If you're generating a card, that's a good thing. And then back on his flip side, he picks up Overwhelm. He's very easily a 6, 8, 10 power Overwhelm attacker, which is a fantastic deal for 4 mana. And as much as we sit here and talk about it and hype up all of the great things with Jack, none of the Jack decks ever came together. He saw a little bit of play with Sett. That was just mainly as another kind of coin generator. Jack Sett was always kind of a weird deck. It was unsurprisingly the most popular deck throughout the glory of Navori season, which could not carry a positive win rate. It feels like Jack Sett was like a top 5 played deck for 2 or 3 months in a row, sat around with a solid 45% win rate the entire time. It didn't matter what happened, but the deck could never really pop off. And to me, you know, that's a little bit unfortunate for Jack. This is just, again, the kind of card I love seeing. It's very combat oriented. It ties into a lot of different synergies across the board. You can try and make your brash deck with Nilah. You can try and do something with the coins. You can discard the cards to your Jinx in some kind of Jinx aggro deck. There's just so many different things that you can do within the Jack kit, but it just turns out that Bilgewater's pure garbage and this thing just doesn't work. And so unfortunately, with the kind of card set that Bilgewater has and a lot of the design philosophy behind them, you just don't see a lot lot of core Bilgewater decks, and you never see the kind of build around aspects that we see now out of champions like Morgana or Elder Dragon, to where it's just used all the way across the board. And so maybe this is something we'll see in 2024. We'll see more action out of Bilgewater. We'll see cards see play that aren't Mirai Warden, and the faction will really kind of carve itself out some identity within the terms of competitive play. But yeah, Jack the Winner, definite bummer for me. It has so much positivity tied into what should be a strong Runeterra card that just completely fell flat because the rest of the faction is so bad. Moving on to one that wasn't bad, though, there is Samira. I had to go back through and figure out what Samira actually did at the start of the game, and she's just been fucking nutsos for, for a solid 6 months straight. And so if you weren't familiar with her right at the release of Glory in Navori, when she was summoned or on strike, she generated a flare, so you could have multiple flares in your hand throughout the course of any given game. And then after the 6 cards were played, she got the flip. Nothing changed there, but as she did hit the flip side, she starts generating 0-cost flares, and you can have multiple 0-cost flares in your hand. And then she rallied as soon as you played 6 cards. You didn't even have to do it within that attack token window. You could play 2 cards on your turn, 2 cards on the next turn, and then as your next attack token rolls around, just play 2 more cards and get a rally. She was absolutely nutsos and saw play across the board within just a massive, massive, massive variety of decks. You could basically throw a dart at the available Runeterra champions, pair it up with Samira, and you could find some kind of viable deck. And so the thing to me with Samira is it really kind of drives home the question of where we want the power level of cards to lie. And Samira was something that I felt was actually very, very positive. She influenced a just absolute ton of deck building. But then as you start to look into the competitive space, if you know that there's just a ton of Samiras around, even though she is heavily overtuned, you can design your decks in a way that you're going to combat Samira, right? You can play more mystic shots, you can play heavy metals, you can play 2-3 units for 2 mana. There's a lot of ways to actually come in and combat her influence, and then as you look into the space of best of 3, you can just ban Samira. And so I feel like it's the kind of space to where with a champion, that's a very good thing. But if we look at some of the really divisive cards within the metas that people really talk strongly about, things like Champion Strength, things like Cosmic Call, these aren't cards that you're able to just kind of remove from best of 3. And my stance, my take, my place has always been that Legends of Runeterra is a game about champions, right? You have the League of Legends champions set. When you're playing a game of Legends of Runeterra, you have your champions out here battling against the opposing Nexus. You don't have Cosmic Calls out here battling across the Nexus, right? You don't have Champion Strength battling across the Nexuses. You have the champions out here doing it. And so I always felt like as long as the champions were the powerful and potent thing, then that was good. That was a good place for the game to be in, and I feel like Samira really drove that home, even though she was overtuned. And I think that that's a bit of a bummer that she's got nerfed into oblivion. And so I think there's a chance, she could maybe make a reappearance one day. If you can get in the mindset that Samira is a 6-cost champion that occasionally costs 2 mana, that gets you into the place to where you can start developing Samira decks that may actually come out and work. But it's just been such an ultimate bummer for me that such a widely used and such a variety of decks. You have your aggro Noxus decks loving this. You have your control Plaza Guardian decks loving this. You have your Seraphine decks loving this. You have your Annie Disintegrate decks loving this. There are just so many decks that were ultimately excited to play Samira that I think it's just been an ultimate bummer that she got nerfed down so hard to where she sees no play these days. Up next, we move our way into what was this set? The animal set that nobody liked. I can't even remember the name of it. I'm not going to look it up, and we'll just keep this in the video, but it kind of is what it is. Nonetheless, I would say it was the least successful hype-wise set out of the year, featuring Nidalee, Neeko, and the Poro King, and Nidalee was the one that was up front. And she was a champion to me. I felt like she could have some power to her, right? There's a very interesting collection of curve things that happen with Nidalee being able to play a 2/2 for 2 mana on turn 2 and then flip her on turn 3 and have this exceptionally powerful unit running around with quick attack and maybe getting some quick attack challenges out of the Shurima kit. None of that stuff ever came together. None of that came to fruition. She fell into that trap that there's probably just a unit that's about the same level of good. And if you're going to play a unit that's about the same level of good, you can probably get a champion elsewhere. And so that champion slot just ultimately being so important, Nidalee didn't do anything specifically strong enough to really warrant her inclusion in any deck. Now, that's not to say that she didn't see play, but she saw play in Valley of Imitation decks. Valley of Imitation is really the key card to what made Nidalee exist. And quite frankly, the Valley of Imitation decks could have been successful without Nidalee. If you're not familiar with the big thing that deck was trying to do, you had your Valley of Imitation on the board, then you would play the Big Game Tycoon. The Big Game Tycoon works in a way with Valley of Imitation to where it gets to do the doubling bonus as the transform happens. So you just get this like gigantic 150 unit on the board. It is nice to have those Big Game Tycoon stats transfer over to your Nidalee so that she can make this gigantic overwhelm attack. But that was just kind of like a small piece of the puzzle. It was a little ingredient in the recipe, but not something that was necessary for the deck to work. The deck worked because of Valley of Imitation, which is now up to costing 4 mana, and it really had nothing to do with Nidalee. Otherwise, was there any time that Nidalee saw play within the standard format? No. Like, she did have some kind of interesting things going for her, right? You could play Nidalee, Evelyn, and summon a bunch of husks and have that be a way to activate her transform, but at the end of the day, Nidalee flipping into a giant overwhelm unit and maybe hitting something with a spear didn't really tie into enough of being competitively viable, and she never saw any play outside of this Valley of Imitation deck. A similar thing can be said to Neeko. Neeko saw no relevant constructed play throughout the course of the standard meta. I guess was Seku the one that did well at Worlds with a Neeko deck within his lineup, but at the end of the day, Neeko didn't do too much. And she really strikes me as something that I feel like this has been a bit of a miss in terms of how this type of ability is tying together. And so where I'm going with this is the only really relevant play that Neeko saw was through Warden of the Tribes. We have the 8 mana version of Warden of the Tribes out here to the right. And if you look at them, it seems like they should tie together pretty well, right? Neeko says you can put birds, cats, dogs, Elnix, Fays, reptiles, and spiders into your deck during deck building. But Warden of the Tribes has this line on him to where he only cares about subtypes, right? He doesn't necessarily need to see the specific subtypes in play. And so what we saw happen with Warden of the Tribes is the best subtype unit that he could play, the way I like to call it, the best animal that Warden of the Tribes could see, was a weapon master. And what ended up happening is you would start to play a weapon master, you would start to play Jarvan as an elite, you would start to play a cultist, typically the Demacia scout unit, and at the end of the day, you really weren't playing the subtypes deck, you were playing a weapon master's deck that topped off with Warden of the Tribes and also happened to have Omen Hawk in it, right? And I feel like the real miss, both at the time of release here and for what we're going to see in the future, is not tying the specific subtype stuff into Neeko. And so my thought and idea on what should have made Neeko happen was this needs a keyword, right? This bird, cat, dog, Elnix, Fey, reptile, spider thing needs to be called Menagerie. It needs to be called the Zoo. It needs to be called Animal Friends, right? And then you can say the Animal Friends are all of these subtypes. And then on cards like Warden of the Tribes, you can say when I'm summoned, grant allies +1/+1 for each member of the menagerie you have seen, or however you want to get that wording to go. And then that still gets you in the space to where you can make more of these subtypes cards matter within the future, and they don't necessarily just get boosted because Azir is a bird, right? It really gets the kind of proper tie-in that you're looking for this style of thing to happen, and it feels like the Warden of the Tribes was released like 2 sets too early. I feel like Warden of the Tribes came out maybe in the World Ender, or something within that World Ender space, and then Neeko came out maybe a year and a half later afterwards as kind of, a different mechanically done kind of thing. And I feel like that would just kind of like open up a lot of space in terms of design elements and making things like Warden of the Tribes relevant. And so as far as Neeko goes, maybe she'll have a place in the future. Maybe if she gets a few more subtypes printed throughout the course of the game, she'll be into a space of much more relevance. Maybe she'll get this kind of Elder Dragon treatment that we see now, to where you have your Elder Dragon Saiyan Thousand-Tailed deck within every faction. Who knows? But as it stands right now, I feel like that is my take on Neeko, is not so much the design of her. That's fine. It's just the menagerie zoo kind of thing isn't really driven home. And then I feel like that is kind of hampering her for the future. Moving on to the next one, though, another Runeterran champion, the Poro King. And it's interesting how he kind of rose from meme status to making his way into the World's Finals. And so the Poro King decks really started to pop off once he got the change to his snacks. So as soon as you summon that final Poro, you start to get the good snacks. And he wasn't just relegated to a world of hoping Siren Song worked out with him, right? But it's been a very interesting trajectory for the Poro King. He was kind of like the third deck that you could play in terms of making Siren Song good. And then once Siren Song got nerfed, he fell off the planet. Then he got buffed again, started making his way back into competitive play with the updates to snacks, finally making his way to the World's Finals. And then if you caught the World's Finals, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was unfortunately not the winner. He did not draw any copies of Poro Kings or Poro Snacks in his final game and was eliminated from the event. And so it's been interesting with the Poro King. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think the Poro King style of mechanics are better in the space of kind of like meme deck fringe playable. I don't think this idea of Poro Snacks being good is something that's ever super healthy in terms of a competitive season. If you've played the Poro King mirror match, I've never been a huge fan of it. It feels like a huge high roll to hitting the Poro King, and then after that, whoever hits the most snacks the most tends to win. That's probably a huge reduction for the Frost Booty Irelias out there that just play tons and tons and tons of Poro King, but nonetheless, it feels like it's a very kind of reductive match. But it strikes me as something you don't really like seeing a ton of in competitive play. And so props to the King for making his way up. You certainly did better than Neeko, right? You certainly did better than Jack the winner, and that makes you the King in my books. We'll see if you continue on after the rotation, or if you get kind of kicked back to the lands of the lands of Path of Champions, and you're no longer going to be a standard menace. But after the space of the Neeko set, the Animals Matter, whatever that one was called, we moved in to the Fates Voyage, the two-part set, the Fates Voyage Onward, featuring Nilah, Janna, and Volibear. And up first, we have Nilah, and she's been a bit of an unfortunate champion for me in the exact same sense that we speak to Jack the winner. She has a very impressive stat line. A 2/3 for 2 mana is a fine deal. Adding the brash keyword onto that is probably enough for a unit to be. But then also attacking and generating the slipstreams and having the flippable champion. This strikes me as something that should be super, super, super powerful and super, super, super playable. Now, the only real playable deck that we ever saw out of Nilah was the Nilah Janna deck. It's very, very powerful. Most certainly the strongest deck coming out of the the Fates Voyage Onward set. But outside of that set, what have we seen from Nilah? Fuck all. We haven't seen anything. And what is probably the thing holding that back? The Bilgewater faction. And so it's tough. It's like the entirety of the Bilgewater kit kind of needs to be redone to make a champion like Nilah work. Otherwise, what Bilgewater cards were you really playing in Nilah Janna? There was the elephant version, right? That was a certainly a real deck using one Bilgewater card. But once you get outside of that, like, what do you ever do with Bilgewater? You use it for Mirai Warden, you use it for the tentacle thing that draws 2 cards. There are probably like 5 relevant Bilgewater cards throughout the course of the game, and probably 2 of those want to be in any other Bilgewater deck together. And so whatever the answer is to Bilgewater, I don't have it. Nilah should just be super primed and ready to pop off. Does she just need her friend Legion Rearguard? I don't know what the deal is, but this is ultimately just a big disappointment. If you have champions that are super, super strong like Nilah, you have champions that should be super, super strong like Jack the Winner, and the faction can still do absolutely nothing with it, then there's something wrong with the faction. And so I know this is the champions video, but this is the kind of tie-in to champions that we have. You know, maybe there'll be something in the future with Nilah, something that can really kind of promote the strength that she has. I don't know what it is without a faction rework. But the thing that I will add to that is I don't know if I really want to see the good Nilah deck because that does strike me as scary. These slipstreams are so incredibly powerful. Once you start moving into this space to having a deck that can really, really take advantage of that card draw, be it some combo deck, be it some kind of Plaza Guardian deck, be it some kind of Pirates-esque burn deck, I don't feel like that deck's going to feel super fair or super fun. It's going to be back to that meta to where Pirates is just far and away the best deck, but people don't play it because it's been played for 2 years. Like, that strikes me as where Nilah is right on the cusp of being. She just needs that little bit of help in Bilgewater to quit being shit. And then that's going to be what really pops Nilah off of the map. And I could certainly see her as a card that gets nerfed in the future. And so I think, honestly, out of all of the cards within the past year that haven't been nerfed, Nilah is probably the one that's looking to be nerfed as soon as good cards get printed around her. Speaking of one that did get nerfed, though, it was her best friend in Janna. The Janna kit, to me, is something that I have a hard time telling how powerful it is. It's something to where you're getting beat by something, but you don't really see it, right? And so it's like when Janna hits the board, she starts generating the updraft, and then you get another cost reduction the next turn. You get a draw two turns down the road and get more cost reductions. It doesn't feel like Janna's beating you 3 turns down the road, but Janna just beat the shit out of you 3 turns down the road, cheating out your opponent 4 and 5 and 6 mana. And so to me, it feels like she's in a pretty good space now. I feel like the Janna decks that I play, it feels like she's doing relevant and meaningful stuff, even though she's much more challenging to flip at this point. And so, props to Janna. She does have a bit of that Samira flavor to her, to where, if you can design a deck that just wants to draw cards, then Janna can probably fit into that pretty well. And so as we kind of talked about Karma and Sett being friends, with Sett generating the coins and Karma doubling up the coins, and then the doubled up coins bouncing back to Sett to help him flip and generate the Sett ultimatums, whatever the fuck that thing's called, showstopper. Janna has a lot of those kind of same tie-ins as well. And so if you pair off, say, like Janna with Twisted Fate, she draws the extra cards, Twisted Fate sees you draw the cards, and they can kind of tie together back and forth. Same thing with stuff like Janna Bard, which has been kind of popular over the course of the past few metas. It's very interesting seeing kind of card draws matters kind of decks come about, and Janna fitting into those quite nicely. And so, very well done. I feel like I don't know if that's a good feeling or not, to where this card's beating you, but you just don't really realize it. I feel like there's probably a line in the sand between like the casual to competitive spectrum as to where people are able to recognize that this Janna is beating me. And I think it's probably way further out to the right in that competitive spectrum, to where people should probably be embarrassed about where that line is. But Janna, exceptionally strong. It feels like she's in a pretty good space now. And I think this is all around one of the better designed champions of the year. I just wish that she had more going for her within that kind of Nilah kit, right? Nilah came out with the card draws matters theme. There's only 2 cards that care about that within the Nilah kit, and then that was it. And so it's kind of interesting seeing this resource battle come about. I guess as kind of another aside, it's been very interesting kind of comparing. I used to play Magic for years, Hearthstone for years, and then now I play Legends of Runeterra, and the importance of having cards in hand across the various different games. And being in Magic, it was extremely important. Like, every single card had to be used to the maximum amount, and card advantage was such an exceptionally important piece of the game, to where if you had cards like Janna and cards like Slipstream and Magic, those cards would just be absolutely nutsos, just the amount of card advantage that they would generate over the course of a game. But then moving into the space of a game like Legends of Runeterra, if you want to have 8 cards in your hand the entirety of the game, you can do that very easily. And having these kind of like resource battles within Runeterra aren't nearly as important as they were in other games. And so where I'm kind of going with that is it feels like very safe within the game space of Legends of Runeterra to have drawing cards matter, to where if you're looking at a game like Magic, these cards would just be obnoxious. And so I think it's, kind of a well done thing by the devs, intentionally or not, to have the game be in this space to where a card draw centric champion like Janna doesn't just feel completely over the top ridiculously strong. Up next, though, we have Volibear. Volibear is interesting to me. The way that I initially rated Volibear and what I expected to happen with Volibear is on the first reading of this card, it was never going to see play. Volibear was not going to see play. The Sigil kit is complete garbage, and this thing wasn't going to make any kind of impact on Standard. And over the course of the initial set, that was pretty spot on, right? At least with before the balance patches started to hit and some of the changes to the Volibear kit started to make their way about. But what I expected to happen to Volibear that didn't happen was Riot was going to go, this needs tuning, right? This needs to be a little bit more relevant. We want the bear to make his impact on Standard. And so we're going to start editing some of the ramp cards and editing some of the Volibear. And I really expected him to get buffed and then his kit to just be super obnoxious for the remainder of the set. And then there being some kind of rollback to where they're like, we goofed. We done goofed on all these buffs. Volibear's too much. We got to cut that out. But at the end of the day, I feel like, he was relevant enough. It seems like the casual community really loves playing the ramp decks and the Volibear decks and the War Mother's Call-based decks. It does have a real punishing aspect to it, to where if you're trying to be too mid-rangey within any meta, Volibear can just show up with the ramp deck and say, LOL, I'm like way overpowered compared to what you're trying to do. And it's a nice little interesting kind of check and balance to any given format. And so he, after that, first set, once the balance patches have started to hit, he did get into the space of relevance, and there's been meta-relevant Volibear decks throughout the course of his tenure, and he hasn't been too overpowered along the way. And so well done to him. It just doesn't, feel like a card that I ever really want to play. As much as that hurts to say, seeing this giant 10-10 unit, you feel like that should be something within my wheelhouse. The ramp decks just don't really do it for me. But it seems to be a clearly beloved card. Good, but not overpowered. Very well done. And so now we make our way to the newest set, the final one of the year, the Fate's Voyage Beyond. And so champion number 1 in Mordekaiser, I'll be honest with you, I make content. I'm for the most part able to put out a daily video. I've maybe played 3 games with Mordekaiser, and I've made a total of 0 videos. And he just doesn't do it for me, right? I think I was pretty spot on in terms of my Mordekaiser analysis, right? Like, I didn't initially see the Rekindler kind of things happening with it. I knew that the LeBlanc-based aggro decks were never going to be a thing, and the only thing that really matters with Mordekaiser is this: when you slay another ally, revive it. And it turns out there are some very good targets for this kind of ability. Morgana ties in with this, but the things that we're basically talking about are things like the Rekindler, and so you can have a Mordekaiser die, play the Rekindler, then Mordekaiser onto the Rekindler, and just have this whole board of Mordekaisers. And then now, more interestingly, the Mage Seeker Inquisitor, putting the curse after curse after curse onto the opponent, setting up these games to where you put Deathless onto the Inquisitor, give your opponent the suppression, you trade it out in combat, he Deathless back, gives your opponent another suppression, and then you play Mordekaiser, kill the guy, and bring him back to give out another suppression. And so, if that's the thing you like to do, fine, go ahead and do it. It's just nothing that's ever been really in my wheelhouse. I just feel like, again, Mordekaiser is that one ability. He's a landmark with that one line across it that says, when you slay another ally, revive it. And then if you've rekindled it, you just won that game anyways. Congratulations, you played your expensive cards. And so, that's all I really have with him. I kind of wish that I'd given him a bit more of a chance. It just doesn't feel like a card I ever want to play. And so I think that's fair, right? Every card isn't going to appeal to everyone. He's seen play at Worlds. He was one of the more popular champions at Worlds. Everyone within Fate's Voyage On was well represented at Worlds. It's not like this is a huge swing and a miss of a champion. It's not a champion that's way overtuned. It's fine. It's just out there. It's okay. It's just not a card I want to play. I think that's a safe thing to say. It's fair. I don't have to like everything. You don't have to like everything. It's okay for a card to be mid, and that's just what it is to me. But up next, we do have the big one of the set, and that is Morgana. Now, as the balance patch does come out, I think it comes out like in 3 weeks. I don't think we get a balance patch here at the beginning of January. I think the next balance patch comes out towards the end of January. And I fully expect something to happen to Morgana within that. The Curses package, people are getting fairly salty about now that she's been out for the matter of a month. But to me, the Curses package isn't too bad. There's just too much tied up within this one card. Having the Curse thing is good. Having the Lifesteal thing is good. Having the 3/4 stat line is good. The flippability is good. There's just like a little bit too much here that's just good all around, right? There's nothing that says, okay, here is Morgana's weakness, right? She's really good at lifesteal. She's really good at cursing, but her stat line sucks, right? Or she's really good at stats. She's really good at lifesteal. Let's tone back the curses, right? There's something that Morgana needs to suck at, and she doesn't do any of that right now. And so as the next set comes out, I think the only real places to kind of touch on with Morgana are her stat line. I think if you take her up to 6 mana, that's just way too obnoxious. Like, I don't think that making Morgana a 4, 5, 6 mana unit makes a lot of sense, both thematically and in terms of game execution. Messing with the targeting thing isn't a problem point. Messing with the shackles themselves doesn't seem like the problem point. I feel like Morgana is either just going to be a 3/3, so she dies to a lot of this stuff she's getting into combat with, or she's going to be a 2/4. Which nerfs the lifesteal a little bit, and now she can't take down a 3/3 in combat. And so that's the space I kind of expect for Morgana coming up. Once people have had more of a chance to get in tune with the curses and how to combat them and deal with them, I think that kind of hate will die down quite a bit. But I think Morgana is fantastic in the sense that she's showing up all over the place, right? We've surprisingly seen her turn up as the Riven counterpart. I think that's been fantastic. She's hitting things up now with Galio and the Elder Dragon. She's been good friends at Worlds with Mordekaiser. Like, there's been tons of decks to find ways to make usage of this Morgana. If you follow the Battles with Bust video series, the video that we just released an hour or two ago was Morgana with Udyr using strikes and stance swaps and stuff. Like, she's a very, very interesting champion, and I don't want that to go away. I think that she just needs toned back just a touch. And I think that's what we'll see. Something hitting in the vein of the stat line and not so much any of her other abilities. But I must say, well done. This is I must say well done across the entirety of Fate's Voyage Beyond, I think, in the sense that as Worlds came and went, all of the champions saw play, some of them more than others, but definitely meta relevant across the board, yet nothing that feels like obnoxiously strong, especially since High Show the Turtle got nerfed and the World's competitors didn't have to deal with that. And so very well done with Morgana. And so, last but not least, we do have the Elder Dragon. And while I don't think that the Elder Dragon is overpowered, it is a card that gives me a little bit of worry. I've always worried about the deck building aspects of these cards, be it Gen, that lets you play anything with a skill, Rise as anything as a burst spell, and now the Elder Dragon as any unit that has a 6+ cost. And I put the title on here as Stoneforge Mystic, because if you're not familiar with Stoneforge Mystic, this was a card in Magic that basically let you search your deck for an equipment and put it in your hand. And then once you had that equipment in your hand, it lets you put it on the board for 2 mana. And so you could just go and say search up a 10 mana equipment and then put it on the board for 2. Or more commonly in the space of Magic, there was Batterskull, which was just a unit that got attached to the equipment that cost 5 mana. You'd get a 4/4 lifelink unit that you would put on the board for 2 mana, and then as it died, the equipment came back to your hand, so you could just put it back on the board again. And so the thing that this is leading towards, however much you care about the Magic analogies, is every equipment card from that point forward had to be designed with Stoneforge Mystic in mind. And that's the kind of thing that starts to worry me about the Elder Dragon, right? Is this card worth having around if now we have to worry about every single 6th cost card fitting into a bunch of decks. And we've seen that a touch, right? We've seen Lord Broadmane and Riptide Rex plus Jin fit their way into Bandle City decks. That deck now appears as Elder Dragon Nora. And more currently in the standard space, we're just seeing so much of Saiyan Thousand-Tailed and the Noxus Dragon, the 6-mana dragon, right? This is a deck that you're seeing all over the place. You say, okay, what deck can I fit Saiyan Thousand-Tailed into now? How can I give it Deathless? Right? Deathless Saiyan Thousand-Tailed is pretty obnoxious. And so you have it with Galio Morgana now. You have it some with Nora. You have all of these different decks just saying, wouldn't it be neat if I could play a Saiyan Thousand-Tailed within this? And that's the kind of space that ultimately worries me about the Elder Dragon. Do we have to start looking at every single unit that costs more than 6 mana and worry what kind of obnoxious deck that's going to fit into? And while, it may or may not be something to worry about, it is a kind of a thing that does have this kind of overarching like looming on card design. Is you go, okay, I'm designing my new big expensive Shadow Isles unit. It has this really powerful ability, but now I don't have to play Shadow Isles to get it. I guess given the tone of this video, the more relevant thing to say would be, okay, I've made this really good and strong and powerful Bilgewater card, right? It costs 6 mana. It does a lot of really cool stuff. It's supposed to be the new highlight, the new shining star of the Bilgewater faction. But now you don't even have to play Bilgewater because of the Elder Dragon. And so I worry about it in that sense. And so I do like a lot of the stuff that happens with the Elder Dragon, the targeting aspect of the boons, the elemental aspects of the boons. I feel like, if the Elder Dragon feels like it's doing too much, like Deathless is a little obnoxious and the double impact can be a little bit overtuned, it feels. But, those are like levers that can be switched within the Elder Dragon that make it feel a little bit safer and a little bit more in tune with the format. But again, you can't really go out and tune every single unit that costs more than 6 mana. So what are you supposed to do with Saiyan Thousand-Tailed now? Is like Saiyan Thousand-Tailed with Elder Dragon just safe enough to have about? Do you ever have a reason to play Ionia-based unit style of decks that have Saiyan Thousand-Tailed in it, right? Are we ever going to be in that space to where, okay, I want to play Ionia today because the Saiyan Thousand-Tailed works so well in my width-based deck, or are you just going to play the Elder Dragon instead? And while that's, fair and safe for like 3 months of standard, is that really what you want for the entirety of the game? Do you want to annihilate region identities for these expensively and powerful cards because the Elder Dragon exists? And it just gets tough for me. I lean into the space of it's not really worth it, right? You're not going to go and make Saiyan Thousand-Tailed cost 5 mana now because that takes it out of the Elder Dragon pool. You're not going to go and mess with stuff like Plaza Guardian and Wiggly Burblefish, but those are things that you have to start to like monitor and watch and check in on now, because the Elder Dragon gives you access to those in weird ways. It just comes out, completely annihilates the existence of the color pie, and lets you get these kind of abilities across different decks and different factions. And so I think the kind of like saving grace to that, the kind of final point to it, is if you go circle back to our thought and idea of Samira, to where it's okay for Samira to be overpowered. You can just ban her in best of 3 if you don't like it. I think that you can kind of tie that a little bit into the Elder Dragon, and that it is okay to give Saiyan Thousand-Tailed to all of the factions, because you only get to do that with one deck, and it does fix itself in best of 3, but it doesn't fix itself on the ladder. And so, I think that just all ties into whatever Riot's overarching goal of a come and grind me competitive kind of scene are, but it definitely leaves up a lot of questions. And so, interesting stuff though. Well done, good set. I must say, over the course of the year, I don't feel like that there were any points I didn't want to play the game, which is good. Coming out of the Seraphine year, I certainly did not like the Seraphine heavy metas, and so I think it's been very well done. I know we trashed on some of these champions, hyped up some of the other ones, but I must say I had a wonderful time coming out, playing and grinding throughout the entirety of the year. I feel like there was a lot of upside to all of these sets, and I think if the worst thing that you have to say about the past year in terms of champions is that like Neeko, Nidalee, Poro King, Sett was just kind of flat and kind of mid, then that's good, right? We didn't run into anything to where everybody was like, oh, fuck, this needs to be banned hard, or this needs to be nerfed, or I'm not playing the game because of this, or this has really ruined my day. I guess Karma Sett got some of that, but at the end of the day, I feel like this was just like a super fun year. I had a wonderful year, and a lot of these champions really tied into that. And so, good stuff. I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Agree, disagree. I missed something with the champions. Be sure to let me know in that comment space. That is going to do it for us today. So, hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope we maybe learned a thing or two along the way. Had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.